We're going to go ahead and start with chapter 7. So, after talking about what makes living things, we proceeded to talk about the chemistry and biology. So, we talked about the 4 biomolecules that composes most organisms out there. Now we're going to hone in on the smaller detail, which is the cell. So, we're going to talk about the structure and the function. As always, you have your vocabulary terms, and I'm pretty sure you know by now, these are the terms that are going to come back on quizzes and exams. Okay, so you can choose to ignore it, that's fine, but know that it will come back on assessments. It looks like we have 34, and a lot of it would be the cell organelle. So if you remember the cell organelles from middle school, you should be able to name or describe half of what's on the vocabulary terms. All right, so we go into cell discovery and theory. So I know that it is already a duh statement that organisms are made out of cells, but it is so easy to take for granted how this was discovered to begin with. In 1590, Hans and Zacharias Janssen invented the first compound microscope. And they did this by placing 2 lenses in a tube. And then comes along Robert Hooke. So there will be a video that you'll watch on Edpuzzle. These names will come back, or they will be mentioned again. In 1665, Robert Hooke made a simple microscope and looked at a piece of cork. Okay, a cork, it's made out of dead cells of oak bark. So corks are used to cover wine bottles. And when he looked at a piece of cork under a microscope, he noticed that there are very small box-shaped structures, and he called these cells. The reason he called these cells is because it reminded him of little rooms that monks would reside in. A cell, therefore, is the basic structural and functional unit of all living organisms. But at that time, this didn't just happen. They didn't just deem that cell is the basic structure and functional unit of living things. So it had gone through quite a bit of history with different scientists. So this is what he saw when he looked at a piece of cork under a microscope. Another guy comes along named Anton von Leeuwenhoek. Again, he will be mentioned in the video. This time in 1863, he made his own microscope. And once he made his microscope, he looked at anything and everything, including pond water, milk, and he was surprised to find small organisms in them. He is credited to be the father of microbiology. So micro meaning small, so biology dealing with the very small things. And this was his microscope that he invented. Like I said, the cell theory, or the idea that cell is the basic unit of life, didn't just happen in one day. It actually had gone through years of study, as well as people that worked with the idea that cell could be the basic unit of life, starting with Matthias Schleiden in 1838. And he was a botanist that concluded that tissues of all plants are made out of cells. A year later, Theodor Schwann, in 1839, working with animals, he also reported that animal tissues are made out of cells. Lastly, we have Rudolf Virchow in 1855, proposing that cells have to come from existing cells. There was actually this idea that living cells came from a non-living organism, where it just spontaneously popped up, which was disputed by Virchow. Oh, why is it not moving to the next slide? So now all that together, everything that we learned from all those scientists in all those years will be compiled into this theory known as the cell theory. So again, it's a compilation of observations from many scientists. The cell theory is one of the fundamental ideas of modern biology, stating that all organisms are composed of one or more cells, that cells are the basic unit of structure and organization of all living organisms, and cells arise only from previously existing cells, with cells passing copies of their genetic material onto their daughter cells. Okay, so these are the three components of the cell theory. Now, in order to do so, in order for the cell to be observed, a microscope needed to be used, and the modern day microscope looks like this, which we will be working with this later on. So this is a simple compound microscope. And then we have this equipment called the electron microscope, which can really zoom in into whatever it is that you're looking into. Okay, now the one on the right is about $150. The one on the left. The one on the right, if ever I would purchase this, I think it's around 5 to 10 grand, which is impossible at this point. All right, so now we delve into cells. So again, a cell is the basic structural and functional unit of all living organisms. So structure being, it creates, it's the very basic of what we're made out of, as well as how we function as an organism. So this is one image of an animal cell, and here's an image of a plant cell. Again, if you remember from middle school science, you will be able to distinguish the difference. Okay, we have two basic cell types, one being prokaryotic cells and eukaryotic cells. Prokaryotic cells are without a nucleus. So if you recall, the nucleus is the dense center of a cell. It is much smaller, so prokaryotic cells are much smaller than eukaryotic cells. Examples being E. coli bacteria in your stomach, Streptococcus bacteria, which causes strep throat, as well as Streptomyces soil bacteria, so bacteria that can be found in the soil. Now, eukaryotic cells are cells that contain nucleus. So really the big difference between eukaryotic and prokaryotic cells is having a nucleus, as well as membrane-bound organelles. Again, the nucleus is a distinct central organelle that contains the cell's genetic material in the form of DNA. And in terms of an image, this would be what they would look like. So as you can see on the left, eukaryotic cells or eukaryotes, it's a lot more complex. You have different types of organelles or different cell parts. And then you have prokaryotes or prokaryotic cells. There is no distinct nucleus, and you cannot see different organelles. They're both still functional, they just have different features. Alright, so we're going to go ahead and stop there. The plasma membrane will be for another day.